Okay.
Okay. So, Fanita, we are still have some of your concepts which we haven't had a look on it, and one of is the main, very important concept of racketeering. So it's in origin, it's not it's related to burn, is it right? Or
Yes, actually, what happened is there was a category of patients or clients or people who exasperated burn. And they
Okay.
were the people who exhibited phony attitudes or feelings. And I think anybody would know that. People who say, for instance, oh, isn't it nice? Isn't it so wonderful day? I'm so happy. Oh, we all need to be very happy or glad or whatever. Life is wonderful and so on. And you hear that it's phony and it's exasperated, but they keep going on. It's repetitive. Or another kind of person is going to be repetitive about sad feelings. Oh, I'm sorry, I just can't enjoy things. Yes, you go ahead and enjoy, but my life is, boring or sad or whatever. And these were repetitive feelings, and they were sort of looked like wanting to extract strokes. I mean, invitations to the other person, especially to the therapist, of course, to say, oh, the happy person, oh, yes, it's wonderful that you can look at life in this wonderful way, stroke the person for that, or else the sad person or the angry person, yes, I understand that you're angry, however, and so on. There would be a lot of dialogue. And Byrne felt that this is phony and false, and he had these 3 ego states, and he believed that if he explained with the adult ego state, hey, look, this is phony and exaggerated, and you've said that so many times, and he sort of wanted them to get out of it. And finally he said, these are rackets. And the word rackets, as most people know, rackets refer to gangsters who extorted money from businessmen for their, allegedly for fire insurance, but it was really protection rackets. We had that in America, and I think it's known pretty much all over. It's known all over the world, right?
Yeah, it
this
is.
business of rackets. Okay. And he used to be quite angry and, refused to offer strokes or sympathy or whatever, or admiration, whatever the case. And I always felt a little uncomfortable because the patients did believe that they had these feelings. Byrne claimed they do not feel this way, and why do you claim to feel this way, and so on and so on. And indeed, well, I'll go back to that. I was going to say that indeed very many people come into treatment because they have some kind of racket. But why do they come into treatment? It's not clear. Okay. And it
wasn't even, it was a little bit difficult to make a real contract with that.
Exactly. And I think it was a part of Byrne's fight also with the psychoanalytic establishment, because he felt that the therapist is expected to show support for feelings or attitudes which he felt were phony and which did sound and appear to be phony. Okay. And this was kind of a running argument. As you know, I trained with Byrne, and I was already a mature therapist who worked for a number of years, and it was difficult for me to always agree with him. But I didn't quite know how I disagreed and why I disagreed about the rackets thing. I felt that about these rackets, about this naming people as rackets. So at the conclusion of my therapy, of my training in Carmel, I went back to Chicago and I was brooding about this. And I realized in working with other clients that rackets, what he called rackets, these repetitive phony feelings, which would be the definition, and attitudes, that these were substitutes for other feelings that the person didn't dare show.
And some were prohibited feelings.
Yes. And as you know, my emphasis was on how, when I talked, for instance, about survivor conclusions, how certain attitudes, repetitive attitudes, refer to certain attitudes or feelings that were stroked in the past, during childhood. And this looked to me as though rackets, what he called rackets, were substitutes for other feelings which the person didn't dare show. And I have an article, and so I ended up writing an article which I wanted to submit to Byrne. And this is my first article on the subject. It's called The Substitution Factor, Rackets and Real Feelings, and we have a link on this one. And in it, I describe the case of Thea, who was a friend, a colleague, who was chronically sad little girl and wanted to be stroked for it. And I realized at a certain point that she had never allowed herself to be happy and cheerful. And I realized, this is detailed in the article, that really her sadness often came on at times where she really wanted to be cheerful and happy. And so I wrote out this article, and I wrote out about other typical so-called rackets, a hostility racket, for instance. Joe is always angry, always finds something, he has a chip on his shoulder. Yes, this makes me so furious. And actually sometimes it was because Joe was touched and warm and feeling. So it refers, rackets are often established at this very sensitive developmental stage between 2 and 4 and 5. And they are substitutes, this is now my definition, which was not Byrne's definition. Rackets are substitutes for real feelings and attitudes which are prohibited, which were prohibited or ignored or discounted during childhood. Mother or father or whoever was the caretakers took the idea, you don't really feel this way, and they never even named the feeling that. So a typical feeling or attitude, for instance, would be jealousy. And instead, the older child looking at the younger child and feeling envious or jealous or competitive or whatever. And it would have been okay for mother or father or somebody to name, oh, I see, you resent or you're jealous or you don't like the fact that Susie is getting all this attention. Instead, mother and father would ignore it and say, oh, you're really a loving child. You love your little sister or brother. You are, and stroke the person for being loving. And so the grown-up Susie would show how loving she was whenever she felt jealous, or how generous she was whenever she felt
in some way just the opposite
Yes.
behavior.
Yes.
She has to show, she feels obliged to show.
That's right. And this then causes lots of problems for the grown-up person. For instance, I remember a client who had a lot of problems with her fiancé, with her boyfriend, because he wanted to do something nice for her. He invited her to dinner and gave her ordered her favorite dish, which she had smiled and said was a favorite dish. Actually, she hated that dish. But she did not allow herself to even know that she disliked that. And she could not be honest and open with him. So as I said before, I wrote this article and prepared it for Byrne, and was going to give it to him to read at the summer conference of 1970. And he died just before the summer conference of 1970. And he had set up set up the journal, was going to start that year. Before that he had the bulletin. And
the
TA bulletin, that's right, thank you for correcting me, because, anyway. So, the new editors of the journal had no articles to publish. And so they insisted on publishing this article. And so they published this article, Substitution Factor, in one issue, and then another part of the article where I detail other substitute feelings in a second issue of the journal. And some of it is outdated when you read it, but I think you'll get a kind of sense about this substitute, and also you'll get the example of Thea, who substituted
Yeah.
sadness for happiness.
In that time, did you have a discussion with Byrne about?
No.
It
And
was
that's
really your
what-
stuff, and it was
yeah,
not
That's
okay.
right.
Okay.
And the word racketeering became my word.
Okay.
He had not used the word racketeering. He said they're playing rackets, so this is a racket. Racketeering. And racketeering is the transaction whereby a person wants strokes for the substitute feeling. But since it's a substitute presentation, and they get stroked for the wrong feeling or attitude, they're never satisfied. And this is why it's repetitive. And so the cause of the repetitiveness is precisely the fact that the expression of this feeling and attitude is the wrong expression and does not gratify the person.
That relates in some
Yes.
way to games, or isn't it?
Well, yes, because as a result of, thank you for saying that, because as a result of developing this concept of racketeering, which is a transaction on behalf of rackets, I spelled out how my concept of games is very different, and that the game ending is not pre-planned, as Byrne implies when he talks about games, but is the unfortunate result when a transaction is crossed because the partner is sick and tired of offering strokes for something which is felt and is obviously a false, artificial kind of attitude or feeling. The article that I would like you to read now, if you want to pursue the topic, is the article Rackets Rackets in relation to games, and this is linked also to this presentation. And if you want to understand the topic, I think that's the way to read it, and that explains also how I conceptualize games in a very different way. In fact, I thoroughly dislike the nomenclature of games.
Yeah.
I dislike those awful words. Now I've got you, son of a bitch. Awful. Now I've got you, son of a bitch is the end of a series of transactions where the racketeer fails to get the strokes he or she wants for the real feelings and keeps going on, and the partner gets mad, and then there is a plus transaction as a result.
And that happens very often in the daily business, and I mentioned business because in the business world as well. Yeah.
That's right.
And when you can feel it when people come in a room and in a workshop or whatever, in a meeting, and the very first minutes in some way they are racketeering. Sometimes they play the best of what they can or what I think would be the best, but it feels hollow and it doesn't feel substantial. And that is one of the points, in particular in coaching, we are looking for what kind of racketeering does the coachee at that very moment. But usually he would try or she would try to get some strokes or some acknowledgement from the coach who is paid for acknowledgement, and therefore you can get very easy, very quick to what is a racketeering game, I would say. Yeah.
In fact, with hindsight, I know that the main reason why I switched from psychoanalytic therapy, or let's not call it psychoanalytic, supportive therapy, to transactional analysis, is because I was beginning to feel burnt out. And I was feeling burnt out. This is a kind of a message I'd like to give to coaches and to therapists, that very often a coach or therapist, or I'll talk about myself, I began to feel burnt out because I was stroking the typical victim wife. This is my generation, who would come in, settle down, and talk about how sad she was, how unhappy she was, and her husband never gave her enough recognition, and life was difficult, and so on and so on. And I would say, yes, and I understand, and of course, and it's hard, and have you tried this, and have you tried that? And the person really didn't have inner permission for spontaneity, for going and being authentic and choosing what she wanted to do and say.
can stand for herself.
Yes, yes,
But to
yes.
feel suppressed
Yes.
on a certain system or whatever it was.
And my patients were happy to keep paying for these sessions. They paid on, and they said, they praised me, they referred me, and I hated these sessions of constantly supporting what I now know was a racket, or the process of racketeering. I'll give you shall we continue? Shall I give you an example of a funny kind of a story here? There we have I'll just tell you a story. There's the group, and we have Susie, who's ending her group, and it's her last session, and she's saying goodbye to everybody, and she's obviously very fortunate. She's got a good boyfriend, and she's happy and leaving, and she's gotten a few little gifts from the other people in the group. And there is Anna, who is a new client, who's just come in, and Anna has a lot of problems, and there's financial problems and all kinds of other problems. And Anna wears a very beautiful belt, which she had mentioned that she had bought with her savings and cost her a lot of money. And as Susie leaves, Anna goes up to her and says, Susie, I want you to have this parting gift from me, the belt. And I, as therapist, was totally shocked. I mean, there was no reason for Anna to give Susie that present. They weren't friends, they had just met. Anna was showing us, so this was a typical racket, and poor Anna was hoping to get lots of strokes, and recognition for this great, generous gift. This was going to show how generous she was, but underneath it, there had to be some kind of feeling. So of course, I guessed, that's the challenge for the coach or the therapist. I guessed that she was feeling envious of Susie. I mean, Susie has everything. And Susie has everything, and Anna goes and gives her more, where poor Anna, has nothing. So instead of being able to articulate, even for herself, gosh, I am jealous of that wretched Susie, who's...
But that leads to how to deal with it. If you want to work with a
how I dealt with it was I had a flash of intuition. I hardly knew her. I said, did you have a younger sister? Because I thought that there's a parallel. Yes, she said, and how did you get along? Oh, we got along beautifully. Everybody thought we were twins. She was a year younger than me, and we were in the same class, but people thought we were twins, and I was so proud of her for being so smart. I mean, look at that. How could she be proud of her? Well, obviously it had been instilled into her that she had to be proud instead of jealous or envy. And I said, well, did you never feel envious or jealous of your sister, who managed a year younger to be? Oh, no such thing. Now, this woman by profession was a sociologist. She knew the words jealousy, envy. She knew the theory. She did not know it for herself. She was shocked by my reference to envy and jealousy. That's all the more funny because she knew it theoretically.
Because maybe it was much more easier for her to talk about in a professional sense and not in a personal sense. And
That's right. That's right.
And more in general, I think is to discover what is the not lived feeling, not lived emotions, what's the underlying emotions, and to work for the acceptance.
To try and get praised for having been so generous and kind and supportive and whatever else. Now, this has nothing to do exactly with rackets, but I'll put in a little point there about the advantage of working in groups, because it was so good to have other people in the group say, oh, I would have felt furious at my jealous, envious, I would have felt this, that, the other. And Anna was looking with great eyes. You couldn't imagine that she could have felt this way. Anyway, so here is an example of treatment, if you want, trying to guess at the underlying feeling, trying to offer some support for it. And the story of Thea, which when you will read it in this article, shows you how, with support, Thea allowed herself to feel good and happy at times, not always. When at times where she felt obliged to feel sad because this was expected of her in childhood. You'll read the reasons and the story about it. I think that's. But I'll say one more thing. The funny thing is that in the TA community, I'm known as the person who is the expert on rackets. But I'm not. But rackets are not well defined. Very many people define them in a way that I don't like. And the word has been used now in all kinds of ways. The main thing is there are repetitive feelings or attitudes or thoughts even which come in and are expressed and articulated as substitutes for some kind of a thought or feeling which was not permitted and not even named
in childhood.
During childhood.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Here's a little personal item, as long as we're doing all this.
Yeah.
So this is, let's say, my theory and my contribution. It's years later that I realized that I carried a racket. And my racket was the racket of courage for fear, substituting for fear. And I now know how this racket originated. Now I might as well present myself as a case here. And that had to do with the fact that we moved rather precipitously from Romania, we meaning my mother and father and myself, to Turkey when I was 4 years old. And for me, my aunt and my grandfather were really the parents who had been raising me because my father was in the war. So it was very difficult for my mother to accept the fact that I felt very sad about leaving my aunt and grandfather in Romania, and really was not happy now that we were a reconstituted family and that I now had my mother and father, the father whom I had just met when I was 4 years old, instead of the grandfather whom I adored and whom I had to leave behind. So my mother would keep saying, isn't it wonderful, we're a family, we are now together, isn't that great? And expressing longing, sad, and so I was courageous or whatever it was. I was sort of accepting what was. She praised me for that. And whenever I said something implied that I missed or was sad about my grandfather and mother, it was brushed off. And the funny thing is that you can define the way I subsequently behaved now as a grown-up as denial. That during the war, instead of fear, I often just sort of shrugged it off and said, well, you know, it's not so scary after all. And I know that it was a racket and I didn't know it was. So my point here is that sometimes rackets are useful.
Yeah. And maybe it could be some part of your character and of your talents which are really strong, which have very, very useful sides. But if you play too often in the wrong moment, then it looks like quite appropriate behavior, but it isn't anymore, and it's turned in racketeering. So that means so there's both sides of the medals.
Yes.
And therefore, I think particularly as I know about your story in France, and when you had to fly for the Nazis, that was very helpful that you were courageous, and even when you suppressed your fear.
Yes. I claimed that I was not afraid, and I did not know that I was afraid.
Yeah, and therefore I think yes, we have to look very sensitive on what is, and sometimes the strong sides are the strong sides, and sometimes the strong sides are racketeering.
That's right.
Yeah.
And nowadays my daughter accuses me very often of denial, which is very funny. I never connected denial, what the classic psychoanalytic denial, with rackets. But actually denial is a form, or the denial of certain feelings is a racket. All right. That's kind of a new contribution. I have never quite described it before.
Okay. Good. So we did it now. Okay. Thank
Okay.
you.